Hello, dear audience, and welcome to our Charts podcast. Today's title is Data Centers in the Crosshairs, Responding to Public Concerns. So I promise you a very interesting episode coming up. Data centers have become one of the hottest infrastructure developments in America. As AI adoption accelerates and digital demand continues to grow, so too does public scrutiny. Concerns about water consumption, energy demand, electricity prices, environmental impact, and community oppositions are increasingly making headlines across major media outlets. Today, we're joined by Jeff Hahn, principal at Hahn Marketing and PR, and Jason Stephenson. He's the vice president in the energy research practice of Escalent. Together, they recently developed a data center communication playbook based on research with more than 3,400 consumers across 13 US states. Their goal was to better understand what the public actually thinks about data centers, where misconceptions exist, which message resonates, and how organizations can build trust in an increasingly skeptical environment. Rather than talking about communication theory, we are going to do something a little different. I'm going to read a series of headlines from respected news organizations and ask Jeff and Jason how the industry should respond. We try to be broad in the way we collected those, and we are not biased one way or the other. So I'm just going to dig into it. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Yep, thank you.
Are you ready for this unusual format of a podcast?
I think it's going to be fun. It's like a shooting gallery.
Yeah, well, okay, so I'm just going to go in. And my first headline that I want to ask you about is from the U.S. News and World Report. So, the headline, the $25 billion bill, the hidden environmental cost of America's data center boom is the headline. This article suggests that pollution and health-related costs linked to data centers are growing and they're reaching in the billions of dollars in 2025. So that's the headline, and that's what comes from the U.S. News and World Report. So my question, when members of the public read headlines like this, what assumption are they likely to make about the industry? And if you're a utility developer or policymaker, how do you acknowledge environmental concerns?
Well, I'll go first. This is Jeff. And I think your question is posed in such an interesting way. You use the word assumptions. And that is one of the major findings in the studies. Of the 3,417 participants across 13 U.S. states that were respondents to the survey, what we found was the information gap that exists between what the public knows and understands and what the industry actually communicates is really significant. That gap is being filled by assumptions. It's being filled by misinformation, and it's being filled by headlines like this that are really severely negative for the industry. And so one of the most interesting first takeaways from this isn't necessarily the headline itself, it's that the gap of information is allowing a headline like this to really get traction.
Yep, I agree with Jeff, and I think it is a huge gap between awareness. There's knowledge, but that knowledge is very shallow and more informed by these maybe kind of incendiary type headlines, right? That get clicks that really don't tell the full story. The other thing I think many folks don't realize, data centers, they're not new by any means, right? They've been around for years. They power the internet, they power this podcast, right? So folks have been using data centers and benefiting from what they provide for years and years. These hyperscalers kind of hitting at a certain point all of a sudden where people are stepping back and saying, wait a minute, this is a huge facility or structure that really is or could have some environmental impacts. But those are not understood, especially at the local level. So there's a lot of national discussion around some of these, headlines around negative things like environmental issues, whether it be noise pollution, water usage, other safety risks in the area. And I think it comes down to transparency and trust. And I'll probably say that word more than I need to this conversation, especially at the local level. But it's really making sure that communities understand the real realities, so to speak, of data centers, what it means for the community, what's true and what's not true. Certainly addressing the concerns, they're valid. You don't want to immediately push back, but some of these are definitely, different. These different concerns are going to differ by local communities. They need to be addressed, and there needs to be a trusted voice that can speak to this. That was one of the reasons for the report that we pulled together, is we feel the utility industry is a great candidate to be that voice of reason, that objective voice. Many of their customers at least have a pretty decent amount of trust in them, and they're sitting on the sidelines for the most part. They're not talking about this. And I'll speak to this perhaps later with some of the other headlines, but their silence is putting them right in the crosshairs of negativity around not only environmental issues, but reliability and cost concerns. So staying silent is at their own risk, essentially.
Thanks, guys. That transparency and trust part and staying silent, it's so important. People are scared of what they don't know. But and if you don't talk, we allow room for misinformation, etc. So I just find it so intriguing how fast the pendulum swung on the data centers. Well, how did it happen so fast, if I may ask you? I mean,
Well, and we've seen the momentum shift on this take a dramatic turn to the negative. That's one of the reasons why it continues to grow, is because there's a lot of now attention on these hyperscalers, as Jason talked about. We have 3,000 data centers across the US. Why now? It's because hyperscalers are now buying up 2,000 acres worth of cropland and putting giant facilities out in the middle of what used to be cornfields. This now feels like uh, Martian colonization. They're coming, they're extracting. And what do we see? We see gray concrete buildings with no windows and barbed wire fence. We don't know. Is this Area 51? And so it feels like a almost a conspiracy building. And boy, does the news media love that kind of carrier wave. So the industry has been its own worst enemy not to be, as Jason talked about, open and transparent about what's really happening. That's what's built up a lot of news media attention. Second, of course, is the opposition. We had a small town in Missouri, right in the middle of the US, that just a month and a half ago, there's 6 city council members who all voted to approve the establishment of a data center in their town. All 6 of them were voted out of office. And the reason wasn't because data center's bad. The reason was because all of the negotiations for that were done behind the scene, out of the public eye. And the mayor is the only one left standing, but he's going to lose his job in November. So I think that's what's really fueling the headlines, is this lack of understanding and the ability for news media to fill in the blanks with just about anything they please.
I think too that the hyperscalers, and I don't blame them for this, they've been building these larger and larger facilities under the radar intentionally. Amazon and Meta aren't coming to town to say, "Hey, well, welcome us, have a parade. We're coming to your town." This is almost under the cover of darkness. In some cases, under alternate company names. They're not using this. Isn't a Meta facility. This is under some other LLC that they're utilizing to stay under the radar. So intentional subterfuge, so to speak. And then when people are starting to wake up and realize, as Jeff said, this kind of close encounters of the third kind monolith that is built in their nice farm area. Oh, by the way, this is powering AI, which has its own stigma and plenty of debate. And oh, by the way, it's being built by billionaires who we all now hate, right?
Exactly.
So it's not like it's like this new medical facility that's going to be on the brink of curing cancer, which, by the way, maybe AI can help with, right? That gets to the benefits, but it's just been done under the radar, and it's being done to facilitate and by people that are, let's just say, lack of trust is a big one with AI, and when it comes to billionaires in general. And that's really created just a very quick snowball effect in terms of the backlash.
Yeah.
no, great answers, guys. Really, I like it. I have to say, you're away with words. So you mentioned the mayor that Missouri. You said that it may be elected out at the end of the year. So that's politics. Let's turn to politics a little bit. And this headline comes from CNBC. It reads as follows: Bernie Sanders and Ron DeSantis speak out against data center boom. It's a bad sign for the AI industry. And this criticism is coming from the opposite end of the political spectrum, where you wouldn't maybe expect it. Does this suggest concern about data centers are no longer partisan and have become a mainstream public concern? And what did your research reveal about the issues that resonate most strongly with consumers?
Well, I think it's absolutely a bipartisan issue. And what the survey research showed us is that it doesn't matter what political party you're affiliated with, you're concerned about three plus one major issues. First of all, my electricity rates. I'm afraid they're going to go through the roof. I have no control over that. Second, the electric grid itself. We're going to experience brownouts and blackouts, and we have no control of that. But this big data center gets all the power that they need. And third, they're going to take all of the water that we have available for our community and use it up. These are the three big resource concerns for data centers. But Jason really touched on what I think is the rawest of nerves, which is the plus one is AI. We could agree, by the way, that data centers are a good thing because the internet's a good thing, because weather forecasting is a good thing, because curing complex diseases is a good thing. All of them require data centers. But when you package the two together, AI as a dehumanizing entity, going to kill jobs. Hell, even the Vatican is against AI. I mean, when the Pope comes out against you, you know you've got a problem. That coupling of AI with data centers is the fourth issue. Rates, reliability, water, those are resource issues. This plus one, this AI dehumanization, that's the X factor that I believe does bring the political parties together.
Thanks, Jeff. Jason, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just a couple elements. I think both parties have something to lose and something to gain here. Certainly, the left side of the aisle is going to be more leaning into the environmental issues. The right side of the aisle more on the economic factors. I think both realize that you have to protect that big three that Jeff mentioned: reliability, cost, and water. But I think there's also a benefit for the savvy politician or local community leader that these data centers have deep pockets here. But if you can guarantee my rates aren't going to go up, my reliability is going to stay where it needs to be, and I think that's not unreasonable to do. You can also say, hey, instead of tax rebates, which or incentives, which have been given to date, and many cities and counties are saying no more on that. We're losing too much tax revenue. Google, Meta, they have plenty of money to throw around to say, hey, how about you help us with the infrastructure rebuild that the utility industry is in dire need of? How about you help with roads in the area? How about you give us free internet for the community? I mean, get creative here. Start bringing in some benefits that counteract these negatives that we're hearing about. And I haven't really seen a lot of that, but I think that the savvy local community leaders or state leaders are going to start really pushing in that direction.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate your insights. So let me go to a headline that comes from this side of the pond, from the BBC. And it reads as follows: I can't drink the water, life next to a US data center. And this story is focused on a retired resident who believes her drinking water, which by the way is from her own well on her property, and quality of life have been negatively affected by a nearby development. And when community raises concerns like this, what are they really looking for from it? From the industry is the one question. And what mistakes do organizations commonly make when responding to such highly local concerns?
Well, always from the data center perspective or any developer perspective, when someone raises a claim like this, your immediate reaction is, we're being held hostage for an issue that may not even be connected to our development. So they're immediately resistant to try to resolve these things. That's when they turn to local city councils or local community government to try and disconnect the issue from their development. So that's always a first line of defense. But Jason hit it just right. These data centers have enormous enormous pocketbooks. They can solve that kind of issue very quickly by making an offer to dig a new well or making an offer to buy the house. There are all kinds of things that they can do to simply acknowledge the concern and move proactively. Whether or not it's connected doesn't matter. Their stockpile of cash allows them to act and behave in a way that diffuses these kinds of situations like no other industry in history. And so I understand the reluctance. They don't want to establish precedents. They don't want to feel like they're being held hostage by what may or may not be connected issues. At the same time, I feel like they have the latitude to be the best corporate citizens ever. And so why not take that tack and see if you can resolve these things before they become a headline?
Yeah, I like the word proactive, and that has not been happening, right? It's reactive. When consumer sentiment goes negative, a lot of corporations defend and explain away, and consumers want to, and communities want to be heard. They want their concerns to be addressed, and doing that proactively is even better. And I think good corporate citizenship is good business. We don't have to get into it, but I think there's plenty of information out there that a good corporate citizen, it's much easier to do business with. You're not fighting lawsuits and backlash. It's better for your investors. None other than Aaron Brockovich has entered the, the arena on the water topic, right? Not specifically on the water topic this time, but she's basically putting together, I think she's put together a forum where communities can post and share their insights around what's happening around data centers to really give the local community a seat at the table in that regard. And I don't get the impression she's anti data center, by the way, either. I think it's just like this could be a good thing for everyone involved. It doesn't have to be under the radar, public backlash, city council members losing their jobs and getting death threats. There's no reason it needs to be that way. Jeff pointed it out, the deep pockets. Be proactive, give the local community a voice. We see it in our study, and I think many other studies have published it as well. It's the kind of the not in my backyard idea. I think it's right around, support for more than 70% don't want it in their community. But when you start getting to the national level, it's, 50, 60% support data centers. And then you start getting into that funnel, and the closer and closer you get to my community, now it's like, okay, well, what does this mean? All of a sudden, we're talking about reliability and cost, and then we're talking about water, and now we're talking about noise pollution because it's my backyard, literally. So, just addressing that, it's a local community issue, but I think the tenets and what you would argue and debate and bring to the table are very similar across communities. Although there are differences, Texas is going to have more water concerns. We saw in the study Pennsylvania has more land use concerns due to farming and agriculture. There's nuance there, and that needs to be addressed. But I think those core elements can reliability, cost, infrastructure, noise pollution, water. There's plenty of dollars and smart people out there that can get in a room and address this in a reasonable way.
Yeah, I'll just finish it up with a fine point. They're going to spend more on attorneys fighting these issues and these brush fires one at a time than they would if they would just solve the problems.
Right.
Thanks, guys. When you're talking from an academic side, from my studies onto energy, and there's a lot of comparisons to windmills. I mean, the Northern backyard syndrome is actually an academic term, most unusual academic term I've heard of. So we don't judge what is good on the macro level, only on the micro level, what is good or bad for us. Again, I agree with you guys. You need to address that. So next headline. So this headline is from Bloomberg, and it reads as follows. AI is draining water from areas that need it the most. Water has emerged as one of the defining issues in the debate around AI infrastructure, as we've talked about. So why is this particular issue gained so much traction in the public is one part of this question. Is it because people understand water scarcity more intuitively than concepts like grid capacity or electricity markets? And how should organizations communicate about water issues in a way that is credible, transparent, and locally relevant?
Well, this one gets a little bit more complicated, and the industry isn't helping itself. Amazon recently announced that it was going to undertake an initiative to make its data centers 75% more water efficient than its previous data centers or previous versions of them. Sounds great, but if 75% less still means that you're draining entire aquifers, it doesn't matter. And that's why communities are so confused by this, because we don't really have an apples to apples way of understanding how much does a data center use. Now, the other thing that data centers do poorly is they try and communicate about a resource in through technology methods. We're going to use closed loops. We're going to use recycled water. We're going to use evaporative cooling and air cooling. These kinds of technologies all can be substantive in their ability to conserve water. But again, the community thinks about water and they imagine a 1 liter bottle. And that's where the translation isn't making sense. We still don't know how much a particular data center uses. There are states in the US that are very water sensitive. You'd better have a really good story and the numbers to prove it if you're going to go into those states like Texas and put up a 1,000-acre data center. So I think the technology dimension of this is confusing, and we need to unpack that and make it much more understandable.
Yeah, in our study, just one of the findings was, I think it was 66% know little or nothing at all about how data centers use water. And then we described some of the ways that some key facts about how data centers may or may not use water. And um, folks that believe each of these are true varies widely from data centers used mainly for cooling, competes with agriculture for water, compete with residential water use, recycles water on site. And there's a lot of different ways data centers can utilize water. They can have a closed loop system. They can be very sloppy about it and use a ton of water, or they could use air cooling and other ways, right? Water is also emotional, right? Especially in the Michigan area, we've had the Flint water crisis, due to lead in the pipes going back 10, 12 years now. So drinking water is a sensitive issue, and it's one that everyone, understands at a base level. I need water, right? I need clean water. But Jeff's right. Understanding how much water is being used, is it recycling? Is it polluting the water? That's just not clear at all. And Texas, again, one of the more favorable states, they could lose that pretty quickly if they don't address the water issue. Not to mention California, which has its own other share of hurdles, regulatory and environmental, but water, again, a big issue there.
Yeah, and in fact, in Texas, we say whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. That's how emotionally charged that particular issue is.
So that's what they say in Texas. That's quite interesting.
Fridrik, think about Iceland, which I had the pleasure of visiting a few months ago, and the glacial water that I was able to snorkel in is some of the purest in the world. Imagine if someone came in and wanted to set a data center. I think there'd be quite the revolt among your population of citizens there, until they understood the implications, right? Um,
No, I agree. And that analogy about, people fighting over water in Texas, I mean, that's why you'll be fighting the future wars on globally over water, I suppose. But
yeah.
so, and now we go. The final one is perhaps the most attention-grabbing headline of all, and they are from Yale Environment 360. Data centers could consume water for 10 million Americans by decade's end. So that's a Yale study. So headlines like this are powerful because they translate infrastructure into something people can really relate to. So it's water for 10 million people. So when consumers hear figures on that scale, what conclusions are they likely to draw is one part of it, my question. And how should communicators provide context without appearing to minimize legitimate concerns?
It's very difficult to get your mind around 10 million of anything. But what I think is really happening, what the emotional reaction to this kind of headline is, Jason touched on it earlier, has nothing to do with the data center, has nothing to do with AI. It has everything to do with billionaires and the inequity that's being foisted upon communities through these developments. It's not 10 million Americans are going to lose water, it's that 5 billionaires are going to take our water. That's the emotional driver of the challenge in this and the friction that gets created to make a good headline.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, many of these types of big industrial projects in America historically are built in areas where there's poverty. Maybe the drinking water isn't clean. You think of coal mining towns in West Virginia and such, going back through our history. So I think it's the big bad billionaires and capitalists coming into our low income or rural areas, ruining our resources, taking our water. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. I think it's very simple for these organizations and data centers to provide a solution to that. And I think the number too, I mean, 10 million, it's, you know, you, I'd love to see a headline, a counter headline, 10 million fewer people will die of cancer based on research supported by data centers. That headline is probably just as accurate as the one that you just read, Friedrich, given, who knows, in the next year, computing power doubles every 14 months or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of benefits here, but I think you hit it on at the beginning of this. It's just bring transparent facts to the table, build that trust. Fact headlines like that without the details are going to erode trust. And again, don't discount the concerns. Listen to the concerns and then help address them.
Here's a perfect opportunity to hire Dr. Larsen and use his tool called Brander. This is a pop for
There you
you.
go.
Why can't a data center do just as Jason has suggested? This data center is dedicated to forecasting the weather. This data center is dedicated, its mission is to solve complex diseases, working with local university. Why not brand these data centers around the mission versus the mark? And if you were able to do that, a community could say, you know what, I don't like it. So, boy, I'm happy that it's curing cancer. You give them a rationale at least to minimize the negativity.
Okay, I like the way you spin this, Jeff. No wonder you've written best-selling books on PR. And Jason, thanks for your insight. I have no more headlines, but I do have a follow-up questions because you've said the word billionaires several times. So billionaires maybe equates to oligarch in Russia, like a few people holding all the power. But then you talked about transparency. Sounds to me like there's a paradox here. If it is the billionaire scenario, then transparency doesn't matter, or does it? I mean, how can we make this smooth with those facts on the table?
Well, even billionaires have their limits. And the construct or framework that we like to talk about as we look through all of this data is social license to operate. A community has to say, you're a good corporate citizen, you can be here. And even billionaires can get pushed back and get pushed out if they don't conform to norms and standards that are acceptable. So transparency is going to be required. This old way of operating behind the scenes, it's now out in the open. There's no going back. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Now, today, we have to operate under a new framework. Social license to operate provides that orientation.
Yeah, you see that illustrated in the utility industry here in the US, where in many cases it's a monopoly. You don't have a choice.
Very good, guys. So I have three questions. And the first one, after surveying more than 3,400 consumers across 13 states, what is the single biggest insight that surprised you?
I'm surprised by how strong the opinions are and yet how loosely held they are. Even with just a little bit of education and a little bit of effort, opinions shift quickly.
I agree. I think it's awareness is high, knowledge is shallow, favorability is middling, but there's a lot of neutral still out there on data centers, and that neutral can be filled from a couple different ways. These kind of explosive headlines that lean negative, or facts and transparency from, by the way, utilities who are trusted voices on this, and others to bring the facts and maybe move it in a more positive direction. So I think there's a middle ground there that's just still kind of figuring things out.
Great, great answers. Second one, what is the biggest misconception that the public holds about centers today? What is your bottom line here?
I think that connection to AI isn't necessarily true. Some are AI data centers, but many of the data centers that we depend on for everything from air travel to getting our prescriptions filled, they are part of our lives and a positive part. There's something to build on there.
Yeah, I agreed that this is a new, quote unquote, new issue or concern or something that hasn't been around is I think a misconception because they've been around for years. Jeff mentioned 3,000 plus already. I think that's a big misconception right now.
Great, thanks. And my very last question, guys. If you could offer one piece of advice to utilities or policymakers or developers or technology companies that are navigating those concerns that we've been addressing, what would that piece of advice be?
Imagine being a good corporate citizen and then behave in that direction.
I think for utilities, get off the bench, get into the game, use the analogy you'd like, but you don't need to be silent on this. In fact, if you are, you're gonna face negative backlash. And buy our report. It'll help you, right? But essentially, yeah, I mean, get into the conversation. And you're gonna have to whether you like it or not. So do it now when you don't have to, be much more beneficial for you.
No, I second that. But for sure, by the report, I wholeheartedly agree, of course. And some of the stuff you said is really eye-opening. I mean, it is for me, and how you can think differently, create brands for its individual wants, etc. But did I not address something or ask you about something that I should have?
Well, a couple of stats from the study, Jason. Remember that if you were voting for a candidate
Yep.
or if you were an elected official, remember those two?
Yep.
This goes back to the political polarity of this. Jason's got the stats. Even in this early poll that we've conducted, it stands out.
Yeah, almost one half, if a data center was proposed near home, would or be very likely to vote based on the issue. Almost 4 in 10 would sign a petition. 1/4 would attend a public meeting. Um, 32% less likely to vote for a candidate if they supported data centers. Now, again, I think that could go the other way very quickly if they can support data centers with those economic benefits tied to them, right?
Yeah.
We're going to let this come in. We're going to understand the impacts, and we're going to leverage this situation to build some roads and some infrastructure and other things that benefit the community.
Yeah. The knock on effects of how this issue is going to affect elections in November in the US to me is the undiscovered question, but we see the early seeds of this being potentially a tectonic a shift in the electorate. That will be something to stay tuned and watch.
Oh, those are good last words. So Jeff Hahn from Hahn and Jason Stephenson from Escalent, thanks for joining us and bringing light to this complex topic. And thanks to all the Charge audience for listening. And I'll see you at Charge.
Thank you for having us.